In this chapter, I want to take a look at implementing one more hook. Of the 4 hooks that we can implement inside of a theme, the last one is hook form alter. Hook form alter is a really powerful function inside of Drupal that has historically allowed modules to make changes to any form provided by any other module in Drupal. So for example, the search module can provide a form, like the search form up here at the top, and then any other module. And now in Drupal 7, any other theme, thanks to hook form alter, can come along and make changes to that form. So hook form alter, documentation on api.drupal.org. This is similar in some ways to hook page alter in that what we're getting inside of hook form alter is essentially a big renderable array that we can make changes to. Hook form alter also takes a couple of additional arguments that are necessary to handle form processing. Let's go ahead and copy this function signature. And then over in our theme, we're going to implement hook form alter. So inside of our template.php file, we're going to add a new function. We'll paste in that function signature, and we'll just change the word hook here to the name of our theme. Implementations of hook form alter take 3 arguments, one of them being this form array. The form array is a renderable array that describes all of the different elements that make up the form that's being altered in this case. The form state array contains a bunch of information for modules about processing this form. When a form is submitted, example, the form state array contains all of the values for that form that the user filled in. And then finally, form ID contains the unique ID of the form. Every single form in Drupal has a unique form ID, and we can use this form ID inside of hook form alter to target specific forms. One of the things I almost always do when implementing hook form alter is use the DSM function to print out the form ID. This will allow me to see the unique form ID of every form on the page. So what I can do here is something like DSM and then form ID. And now when I go back and refresh the page, for every form on the page, I'll see its unique ID printed out. I'll then know what that form's ID is, and I can use that to target specific forms for being altered. If I go back to our site, I can click refresh. And what that DSM function has done is now printed out the form ID for every form that's being displayed on our page. Right now, that's just the search form, this guy up here in the corner. DSM, so Drupal set message, is outputting the value that we asked it to print in this messages area of the page. In some of the previous examples, we've used the KPR function to print out different pieces of the page, like the page array, for example, and then drill down into it. Depending on what hook or like preprocess function you're implementing, may you be able to use DSM, and you may need to use KPR. The difference is DSM, or Drupal set message, is trying to output content inside of the messages portion of the page. But some of the preprocess functions that we call in a template.php file, it's too late in the process of building the page to add anything to that messages area. So that's why we use the KPR function. I like using DSM when I can, though, because it puts it in this more convenient location in the messages instead of sort of just jamming it at the top of the page up here. So on our page, we've got this search form, and we know that the unique ID for that form is search_block_form. We're going to use this information to use hook form alter to make some changes to the search form. What I'd like to do is replace the search button here with our magnifying glass icon. If we take a look at our original mockup, the search form in our mockup here has this magnifying glass icon as a button that we can click on to submit this search form. So we need to implement that inside of our 960 Robots theme. I'm going to use hook form alter to do that. Now that I know the ID of the form that I'm working with, I can target alterations to that specific form. Inside of my template.php file, I can now go ahead and remove this debugging line DSM form ID, and I'm going to add an if statement in here that says if form ID is equal to search block form, go ahead and perform any code. So now I'm only going to perform alterations on the form if it is in fact this search block form. Now let's take a look at what's inside of the form array. I'll use DSM to do that as well. So I'll say DSM form, And if we switch back to our site, we can refresh the page and we'll see the contents of that form array. Like the page array in the previous chapter, the form array is a big renderable array. In this case, it describes a form. It describes all of the elements in the form that are going to be printed out and rendered to HTML on the page, like this text field and the button, and a bunch of additional information about how this form should be processed by modules. When looking at the form array here, there's two different elements. There's this search block form, which is the actual text field, and then there's this actions element here. Inside of actions, there's our submit button. So this is the definition of our submit button and what's used in order to create this submit button on our form. What I'd like to do is replace that submit button with our image of a magnifying glass. When dealing with forms, there's a really useful resource on Drupal.org. If we go to api.drupal.org and you scroll down to the bottom of this first page, there's a link for the Forms API reference. And click on that. The Forms API reference provides a bunch of documentation about all of the different form element types and the different properties for each of those elements. So for example, if I scroll down this page a bit and I find the submit element type, so I've got type here and then submit. So our search button right now is of the type submit. I can see all the different properties that will apply to that element type. I'd also notice that right next to it is another element type, image button. If I click on any of these element types, this will take me to a more detailed description of each of those element types. I'm going to click on image button. An image button says, format a form submit button with an image. That sounds like exactly what I want to do. Replace my search button with an image instead. So what I'm going to do is inside of our hook form alter, I'm going to change the type of that submit button to be image button instead of submit. Back inside of our template.php file, I'm going to go ahead and make those alterations to this form array. I'm going to take the form array and our submit button, which was inside of the actions there, and change its type from submit to image button. So now my element's going to be of type image button instead of submit. The other thing that I noticed when looking at the documentation for elements of type image button was that one of the properties is this #source here. So for image buttons, I need to specify the source of the image to use for the button. So I need to tell it the path to our image file within the theme. So I need to locate that. If I switch over to the Finder, inside of our Drupal directory, in Sites, All, Themes, where our 960 Robots theme is located, in there's an Images directory, and inside of the Images directory, there's this file, search.png, which contains the magnifying glass icon that I'd like to use in place of our submit button. So then what I can do is inside of my template.php file, I can say I'd like to set the source property for this submit element to the path to that search.png file. Because our theme is located deeper inside of the Drupal directory structure than just images/search.png, I need to be able to get the full path to our theme. Luckily, Drupal provides a handy function for doing just that. It's called Drupal get path. We can take a look at the documentation for Drupal get path on api.drupal.org. The Drupal get path function takes two arguments. One is type and one is name. Type is either theme or module or profile, basically the type of thing that you're trying to get a path to, and then the name of that. So in this case, the type is theme and the name is going to be 960 Robots. So I'll use Drupal get path. The Drupal get path function here will return the full path relative to the Drupal root directory to our 960 Robots theme, and then all we have to do is just include the path to our search.png file inside of the theme directory. So that's just going to be inside of /images/search.png. I can do that. Now when I go back and refresh the page, I can see that our form is being altered and our submit button now contains the magnifying glass icon instead of the button with the words search inside of it. It looks like it's a little bit out of alignment though. My guess is that this has to do with the fact that it's not getting some CSS class applied to it that the button inside of our mockup has. I can inspect that element just to get an idea of what that looks like here. I can see it's an input of type image, and the classes that are being applied to it is just one form-submit. And then if I take a look at our mockup and inspect the search element in the HTML there, I can see that it is an element of type image, just like in our site or in our theme, and it has a class of BTN. So I need to make sure that ours also gets a class of BTN, and I think that'll take care of the styling problems. Because the element in our form is just part of a renderable array, inside of hook form alter, I can add additional attributes to that element that can be then added to this button when it's rendered to HTML and printed out on the page. So I can switch back to our template.php file, and inside of the template.php file, what I'm going to do is just make a couple of additional changes to this submit element here. I'm going to change the attributes on it. Specifically, I'm going to change the class attribute, and I'm going to add a new class of BTN. So the class attribute here is just an array of all of the classes that I'd like to apply to this submit button, or to, in this case, our image button. So when Drupal renders this to HTML, what it's going to do is take any additional attributes that we've defined inside of the submit pound attributes here and turn those into attributes on that submit button or input tag. So I'll do that and come back to our site and refresh. And you can see right away that our button is lined up properly now. And if we inspect that element, we can also see that our button now has an additional class of BTN in addition to the form-submit that it had before. So that takes care of the alignment issues. That's a simple example of implementing hook form alter inside of our theme. So we were able to go ahead and change this submit button from being a button to an image button, and then using our search.png file. If we look at the code again real quick, we can see that we did so by altering the form array inside of our implementation of hook form alter. So we copied the definition of hook form alter, pasted that into our theme, and then replaced the word hook with the name of our theme. So it's 960 robots _ form alter. We figured out the ID of the form that we wanted to make changes to, in this case the search block form, and then we made those changes. We can probably remove our debugging code now since we don't need that anymore. And then we can click save. So that's a nice example of using hook form alter to make simple changes to a form. And you can use this to make changes to any form in Drupal. In the next chapter, we'll take a look at some other things that you can do with hook form alter, and a couple of things that you might want to be aware of when using hook form alter as well.